One impulsive decision can change an ordinary evening forever, especially when the stranger you choose knows exactly how to keep a secret. Charlotte Bennet had never imagined that one harmless lie would corner her into making the most reckless decision of her life. The elegant rooftop gala overlooking downtown Chicago shimmered beneath thousands of golden lights, where crystal glasses reflected the skyline and a live jazz quartet filled the cool autumn air with slow, timeless melodies. She had only agreed to attend because her closest friend insisted the charity fundraiser would help her network for a better job after months of struggling to keep her small graphic design business afloat. Instead, the evening quickly became everything she had hoped to avoid. A persistent acquaintance refused to accept polite rejection, following her from conversation to conversation despite every graceful attempt to create distance. Charlotte forced another courteous smile while searching the crowded terrace for an escape that did not involve causing a public scene. Then she noticed him. Standing quietly near the edge of the rooftop, a tall man dressed in a perfectly tailored charcoal suit overlooked the glittering city as though the noise behind him belonged to another world. Unlike everyone else competing for attention, he seemed completely comfortable with silence. No expensive watch flashed beneath the lights. No exaggerated laughter surrounded him. His calm presence somehow stood apart from the crowd without demanding anyone notice it. Charlotte had never seen him before, which made him the safest stranger in the room. Before doubt could overtake courage, she crossed the terrace with quick, determined steps. The man turned slightly as she approached, his steady gray eyes meeting hers with quiet curiosity instead of surprise. Charlotte barely gave herself time to think. She placed one gentle hand against his shoulder, leaned forward, and pressed a brief, respectful kiss against his cheek before allowing it to linger for only a heartbeat near the corner of his lips, just enough to convince anyone watching that they already belonged together. It lasted no more than a second. Innocent in intention, yet bold enough to stop the world around her. She stepped back immediately, her cheeks warming with embarrassment. "I am so sorry," she whispered quickly. "I know this sounds unbelievable, but you may have just rescued me from a very awkward situation." She glanced over her shoulder. The persistent acquaintance had already turned away, clearly convinced he had misunderstood everything. Charlotte released a quiet breath of relief before looking back at the stranger. "Thank you," she said sincerely. "You did not even have to say a word." The man studied her for a long moment. There was no annoyance in his expression, only thoughtful amusement, as though he were trying to understand a story that had begun in the middle instead of the beginning. Finally, a faint smile appeared. "I hope whatever you were escaping was worth the risk." Charlotte laughed nervously. "I am beginning to wonder the same thing." She took one careful step backward. "Please forget this ever happened." Without waiting for another response, she disappeared into the crowd, her silver evening dress vanishing among dozens of guests until she was gone completely. The stranger remained exactly where she had left him, his gaze following the direction she had disappeared long after everyone else resumed their conversations. Around him, several impeccably dressed men approached with unmistakable respect. None of them had witnessed the entire exchange, but one quietly leaned closer before asking, "Sir, should we find her?" The stranger looked once more toward the ballroom entrance where Charlotte had vanished. His answer came calmly, almost thoughtfully. No, he adjusted the cuff of his jacket before allowing the smallest smile to return. "Not tonight." None of the guests surrounding them realized they had just watched an ordinary young woman mistake the most powerful mafia boss in the country for nothing more than a quiet stranger enjoying the evening alone. And neither Charlotte nor anyone else could possibly have imagined that one fleeting moment, born from panic rather than romance, had already begun changing two lives that had never been meant to cross paths. Charlotte Bennet did not stop walking until the cool night air finally settled the frantic rhythm of her heartbeat. She stepped out onto the quiet sidewalk beyond the hotel entrance, wrapped her light coat around her shoulders, and laughed softly at herself. "What were you thinking?" she whispered beneath her breath as yellow taxicabs rolled past beneath glowing streetlights. She had attended enough networking events to know better than to make impulsive decisions, yet the stranger's calm expression had somehow made him feel unexpectedly safe. She climbed into a rideshare, gave the driver her apartment address, and leaned her head against the window while the bright skyline slowly disappeared behind them. The entire ride home, she replayed the awkward moment over and over. She remembered the warmth in the stranger's eyes, the quiet confidence in his voice, and the surprising kindness with which he had accepted an encounter that would have irritated almost anyone else. More than once she considered asking her friend whether anyone knew his name, but the thought disappeared almost as quickly as it arrived. Some moments were better left as strange memories rather than embarrassing conversations. By the following morning, Charlotte returned to the routine that had shaped most of her adult life. Her small apartment overlooked a neighborhood coffee shop where regular customers greeted one another every morning before work. The space was modest but bright, filled with sketchbooks, color palettes, unfinished logo concepts, and framed illustrations from freelance projects she hoped would eventually grow into something larger. Running an independent graphic design business had never been easy. Some months brought enough clients to pay every bill comfortably. Other months demanded careful budgeting, late nights, and unwavering optimism. Still, Charlotte refused to abandon the dream she had spent years building. She believed meaningful work required patience as much as talent. That belief came from her late father, who had owned a neighborhood print shop before teaching her that every successful business began with treating people well long before expecting success in return. Throughout the day, she met with a local bakery owner about a new logo, answered emails from potential clients, and spent several quiet hours refining branding concepts for a children's literacy charity. Every so often her thoughts drifted unexpectedly back to the mysterious man from the gala. She caught herself wondering whether he had remained at the event or left soon afterward. She wondered whether he laughed often or whether the faint smile she had seen was something reserved for unusual moments. Then she shook her head with an amused smile and returned to work. It was ridiculous to dwell on someone whose name she did not even know. Across the city, however, the memory had not faded quite so easily. Inside the top floor of Ashford Tower, Lucas Ashford stood before floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Chicago, while senior advisors quietly reviewed schedules for the coming week. Discussions moved from business investments to foundation meetings and international travel, yet Lucas found his attention wandering in a way that almost never happened. One of his longtime associates finally noticed. "You seem distracted today." Lucas looked toward the skyline before answering. "Not distracted." He paused thoughtfully. "Curious." The associate smiled. "About the young woman from last night?" Lucas neither confirmed nor denied the question. Instead, he remembered the sincerity in Charlotte's apology. She had not approached him because of wealth, influence, or reputation. She had believed he was simply another anonymous guest standing alone at the edge of a crowded room. In a life where nearly every introduction carried hidden motives, that single unexpected moment felt remarkably honest. He did not know her name. He did not know where she lived. He only knew that for one brief second someone had treated him like an ordinary stranger, and strangely enough, that was exactly what he could not forget. 3 days passed, yet the memory refused to settle into the background of Lucas Ashford's carefully ordered life. It was not because of the brief kiss itself. It was because of everything surrounding it. The young woman had never paused to ask his name. She had not searched for status, influence, or opportunity. She had simply needed a moment of help, trusted a complete stranger, thanked him with genuine sincerity, and disappeared before expecting anything in return. In Lucas's world, encounters almost always carried hidden intentions. Every introduction came with expectations. Every invitation concealed negotiations. Every smile demanded something eventually. That single unexpected meeting had been the rare exception, and it lingered in his thoughts far longer than he cared to admit. One quiet afternoon, Lucas stood inside the private conference room at Ashford Tower while members of his executive team finalized preparations for the annual Ashford Foundation Community Arts Gala, one of the city's largest charity events supporting schools, neighborhood art centers, and small creative businesses. Presentation boards covered the walls. Donation reports rested neatly across the polished walnut table. His assistants discussed guest lists, local partnerships, and scholarship recipients. Lucas listened attentively until one item caught his attention. This year, we are inviting independent designers to present branding concepts for the community outreach campaign, one coordinator explained. The finalists were selected by the review committee yesterday. Lucas nodded politely without examining the list. Normally, details like that never required his personal attention. He trusted his foundation team completely. Yet as the meeting concluded and everyone gathered their documents, a single portfolio remained on the table after someone accidentally left it behind. Lucas reached for it almost absent-mindedly, intending only to hand it back later. The cover displayed clean, elegant lettering above a watercolor illustration of the Chicago skyline at sunrise. There was something quietly familiar about the artistic style. Curious, he opened the portfolio. Inside were logo concepts, typography studies, and illustrations filled with warmth instead of extravagance. Every page reflected the same thoughtful simplicity. One handwritten note attached to the final presentation immediately caught his attention. Good design should make people feel welcome before they read a single word. Lucas read the sentence twice. It reminded him of the woman who had thanked a stranger before disappearing into the crowd without looking back. Before he could examine the remaining pages, his assistant returned to retrieve the forgotten portfolio. "I am sorry, sir. One of the finalists left this behind after the committee review." Lucas handed it over calmly. "Who created it?" The assistant glanced at the cover. "Charlotte Bennett. She owns a small independent design studio on the north side." Lucas kept his expression perfectly composed, although something inside him shifted almost imperceptibly. Charlotte. For the first time, the mysterious stranger had a name. He said nothing more as the assistant left the room. Across the city, Charlotte knew nothing about the coincidence quietly unfolding around her. She spent the afternoon arranging sample color palettes for a local bookstore before receiving an email from the Ashford Foundation thanking her for reaching the final round of its design competition. Her eyes widened with excitement. Winning the project would provide not only financial stability, but also the opportunity to build a reputation she had worked toward for years. She smiled to herself, completely unaware that the foundation she now hoped to impress belonged to the very man she believed she would never see again. While several floors above the city, Lucas looked out across the skyline with a thoughtful expression, realizing that fate had quietly returned the one person he had never expected to find. The invitation arrived on a cool Thursday morning, printed on thick ivory paper embossed with the elegant seal of the Ashford Foundation. Charlotte read it twice before allowing herself to believe it was real. She had officially been selected as one of 3 finalists invited to present their branding concepts before the Foundation's executive board the following week. For several long moments, she simply stood beside the window of her small studio, smiling quietly as sunlight spread across her drafting table covered with sketches, color samples, and carefully organized notes. Years of determination suddenly felt as though they might finally lead somewhere meaningful. She immediately called her closest friend, who celebrated so enthusiastically that Charlotte had to pull the phone away from her ear while laughing. "You deserve this," her friend insisted. "No matter what happens, someone finally noticed your work." Charlotte smiled warmly after ending the call. She believed exactly the same thing. Across the city, preparations for the presentations continued with calm precision inside Ashford Tower. Lucas reviewed financial reports, approved charitable grants, and met with community leaders throughout the morning. Yet between meetings, his thoughts occasionally returned to the name he had discovered only the day before. Charlotte Bennett. It was a simple name, ordinary enough to disappear among thousands of others, yet somehow it remained impossible for him to forget. His assistant entered the office carrying a folder containing background information on the 3 finalists. Lucas accepted it without comment, intending only to familiarize himself with the participants before the presentations. He paused briefly when he reached Charlotte's page. Her portfolio listed years of freelance work for neighborhood businesses, nonprofit organizations, libraries, and local schools. There were no luxury brands, no celebrity clients, and no impressive corporate partnerships. Instead, every recommendation praised the same qualities: thoughtful, reliable, easy to work with, genuine. One handwritten testimonial from a children's literacy center caught his attention. Charlotte designs with people in mind before profits. Lucas closed the folder slowly. That sentence felt remarkably consistent with the young woman who had apologized before thanking a complete stranger for helping her escape an uncomfortable situation. There was no contradiction between the portfolio and the memory. Meanwhile, Charlotte spent the weekend refining every detail of her presentation. She adjusted colors repeatedly until they communicated warmth without becoming sentimental. She revised typography so every headline remained welcoming instead of overwhelming. She even practiced her presentation aloud inside her apartment until the words flowed naturally. Although nervous, she reminded herself that this opportunity represented more than one project. It represented years of believing that kindness and thoughtful design still mattered in a competitive world. Monday morning finally arrived. The Ashford Foundation headquarters occupied the upper floors of an elegant glass tower overlooking the Chicago River. Charlotte stepped into the spacious lobby carrying a leather portfolio case, quietly admiring the natural light filling the reception area and the artwork created by young scholarship recipients displayed throughout the entrance. Everything inside the building reflected purpose instead of extravagance. After checking in, she joined the other finalists in a comfortable waiting lounge where coffee, pastries, and fresh flowers welcomed every guest. As she reviewed her presentation one final time, an elevator door opened across the lobby. Surrounded by several senior executives, Lucas walked toward the boardroom with his usual calm confidence. Charlotte looked up almost absent-mindedly, then froze. The portfolio nearly slipped from her hands. Time itself seemed to pause as recognition settled across her face. The quiet stranger from the rooftop gala was walking only a few yards away. Before she could fully process the shock, one executive smiled respectfully and addressed him in a voice everyone nearby could hear. "Good morning, Mr. Ashford. The board is ready whenever you are." Charlotte's heartbeat stopped for a single impossible moment. She suddenly understood why every person in the lobby instinctively stepped aside as he passed. The stranger she had believed she would never meet again was not merely attending the foundation event. He owned it, and he was the man whose name inspired equal measures of admiration, mystery, and quiet respect throughout the entire city. Charlotte remained seated in the waiting lounge long after Lucas disappeared into the boardroom, her thoughts racing faster than she could organize them. The calm stranger who had accepted her impulsive apology with quiet grace was now revealed to be one of the most influential men in the country. She had heard the Ashford name before, of course. Newspapers spoke about his business empire, charitable foundations, and extraordinary influence. Rumors surrounded him constantly, yet standing only a few feet away from him moments earlier, she had seen none of the arrogance people often associated with powerful men. Instead, she remembered steady gray eyes, a patient smile, and a stranger who had chosen kindness when embarrassment would have been easier. Before she could gather herself completely, an assistant entered the lounge and invited the finalists into the presentation room. Charlotte inhaled slowly, adjusted the portfolio in her hands, and reminded herself why she had come. She was not there because of one unforgettable evening. She was there because years of hard work had earned her a place at that table. The boardroom overlooked the Chicago River through towering glass windows that filled the space with crisp morning light. Around the polished walnut table sat foundation executives, community leaders, and senior advisors. At the head of the room sat Lucas Ashford. When Charlotte entered, his eyes met hers for only a brief moment before he politely acknowledged every finalist with the same composed professionalism. There was no sign that they had ever met before. Strangely, that made Charlotte feel more comfortable. One by one, the presentations began. The first finalist emphasized bold marketing strategies and national recognition. The second focused on modern branding trends and digital expansion. Finally, Charlotte stepped forward. She placed a simple illustration on the display screen showing a welcoming doorway formed entirely from colorful books, paintbrushes, and community hands reaching toward one another. The room grew noticeably quieter. I believe good design should never make people feel intimidated, Charlotte began with calm sincerity. It should make people feel invited before they ever read a single sentence. She spoke naturally about neighborhoods, libraries, children, volunteers, and the importance of making every family feel that the foundation belonged to them as much as anyone else. Instead of discussing profits or publicity, she described trust, belonging, and hope. Lucas listened without interrupting. Every word sounded remarkably consistent with the woman he remembered from the rooftop. She approached people the same way she approached design, leading with kindness instead of performance. When the presentation ended, the board thanked her warmly. Lucas waited until the other executives finished asking technical questions before speaking for the first time. Miss Bennett, he said calmly, you described design as an invitation rather than an advertisement. What made you see it that way? Charlotte smiled thoughtfully. Because the most meaningful opportunities in my life began with someone making me feel welcome before they expected anything from me. I believe organizations should do the same. Lucas held her gaze for a quiet second before giving a small nod of appreciation. Thank you. That was all he said. Yet somehow those two words carried the same quiet sincerity she remembered from the rooftop. After the presentations concluded, the finalists gathered their portfolios and prepared to leave while the board remained behind to deliberate. Charlotte had almost reached the elevator when she heard measured footsteps approaching from behind. She turned and found Lucas standing a respectful distance away, his expression as composed as ever. Miss Bennett, he said with a faint smile that immediately brought back the memory of the rooftop beneath autumn lights, I believe this time we should introduce ourselves properly. Charlotte could not help smiling, despite the nervous surprise still lingering inside her. I think you are right, she replied softly. And I owe you another apology. Lucas shook his head gently. Actually, he answered with quiet amusement, I was hoping we could begin with a conversation instead. Lucas led Charlotte toward a quiet lounge overlooking the river where floor-to-ceiling windows filled the room with soft afternoon light. Fresh coffee rested on a small oak table beside comfortable armchairs, creating a space that felt more welcoming than formal. Once the door closed behind them, the noise of the executive offices faded into gentle silence. Charlotte stood for a moment, still uncertain how someone with Lucas Ashford's influence could appear so remarkably at ease. First, she said with an embarrassed smile, I truly am sorry about what happened at the gala. If I had known who you were, I never would have. Lucas raised one hand with quiet reassurance before she could finish. That is exactly why I remember it. Charlotte looked at him with confusion. Lucas smiled faintly. For one evening, you spoke to me without knowing my name, my business, or my reputation. You treated me exactly as you believed I was. That does not happen very often. His honesty caught her completely off guard. She lowered herself into one of the chairs while he took the seat opposite her. Sunlight reflected softly across the polished wooden table between them. I thought you would forget me by the next morning, Charlotte admitted. Lucas gave a thoughtful shake of his head. I tried. The answer made her laugh quietly. You are serious. Completely. He leaned back comfortably. Most people remember me because of what they hope I can do for them. You remembered to apologize before you even knew my name. For a brief moment, neither of them spoke. The silence felt surprisingly comfortable instead of awkward. Charlotte noticed family photographs displayed on a nearby bookshelf rather than expensive awards or trophies. Children painting murals. Volunteers planting community gardens. Elderly couples smiling at charity events. The images felt genuine. She found herself studying them before speaking again. These are all foundation projects? Lucas nodded. My grandmother believed that success means very little unless it creates opportunities for someone else. Charlotte smiled softly. She sounds like someone I would have liked. Lucas glanced toward one particular photograph of an elderly woman surrounded by neighborhood children reading books together. You probably would have. The conversation drifted naturally from work to childhood memories, favorite neighborhoods, local bookstores, and the small family businesses Charlotte loved helping through her design work. The more they spoke, the more surprised Charlotte became. Lucas asked thoughtful questions, listened without interrupting, and never once looked at his phone despite the constant demands she imagined someone in his position faced every day. Eventually, an assistant knocked gently before entering with several folders. "Sir, the board has reached its decision regarding the design competition." Lucas accepted the envelope, but did not open it immediately. Instead, he looked toward Charlotte. "Before we discuss business, there is something I would like to ask you." She waited curiously. The Ashford Foundation is expanding several community projects over the next 6 months. They will require someone who understands not only design, but also the people those designs are meant to serve. Charlotte listened carefully. Lucas continued. "Would you consider working directly with our foundation during that time? Not because of what happened on the rooftop, and not because we met by chance today. Because after hearing your presentation, I believe you understand our mission better than anyone else in this competition." Charlotte blinked in surprise. "You mean, regardless of whether I win?" Lucas nodded. "Regardless of today's result." She looked down at her hands, realizing the opportunity before her was larger than she had imagined. Yet another thought quietly surfaced. Accepting would mean working closely with the mysterious man whose unexpected kindness had already challenged nearly every assumption she had formed about him. She slowly raised her eyes to meet his. "I would like to understand exactly what you are asking." Lucas smiled, recognizing both her caution and her honesty. "That," he replied warmly, "is exactly the conversation I hoped we would have." Charlotte accepted the temporary position the following week, promising herself that she would judge Lucas Ashford by his actions rather than by the countless rumors surrounding his name. She reminded herself that 6 months would pass quickly. She would complete the foundation campaign, help strengthen community programs, and then quietly return to growing her own design studio. It sounded simple enough. Yet almost from the first day, she realized the man behind the public reputation was nothing like the image the newspapers had created. Their first project took them to a neighborhood community center on the west side of the city, where the Ashford Foundation had funded a complete renovation for local children. Charlotte expected photographers, speeches, and carefully staged publicity. Instead, she found Lucas arriving 30 minutes before the event began, carrying folding chairs alongside volunteers before any guests appeared. He greeted every staff member by name, thanked the teachers for staying late, and spent nearly an hour listening to parents describe the programs their children hoped to join. No cameras followed him through those conversations. In fact, when a photographer asked him to pose beside the new mural, Lucas politely suggested taking pictures of the children painting together instead. "They are the reason this place exists," he said quietly. Charlotte noticed the photographer immediately lowered the camera toward the young artists, exactly as Lucas had requested. That afternoon, they visited a neighborhood library supported by the Foundation's literacy initiative. Charlotte walked through bright reading rooms filled with colorful books, while volunteers organized story time for dozens of excited children. Lucas disappeared for several minutes, and she assumed another executive meeting had demanded his attention. Instead, she found him sitting cross-legged on the carpet in the children's corner, reading aloud from a picture book while a circle of smiling faces listened with complete attention. His voice carried warmth and patience rather than authority. Every child laughed freely when he changed his voice for different characters. One little boy proudly handed Lucas a crayon drawing after the story ended. Lucas accepted it as though receiving an invaluable work of art. Rather than handing it to an assistant, he carefully placed it inside the leather portfolio he carried to every meeting. Charlotte watched quietly from the doorway, feeling another assumption dissolve without anyone saying a word. Over the following weeks, they traveled together to schools, neighborhood gardens, and small businesses supported by Foundation grants. Every project revealed another side of Lucas few people ever witnessed. He remembered employees' birthdays without checking notes. He visited retired volunteers who could no longer attend events in person. He quietly arranged scholarships for students whose applications had almost been overlooked because of financial paperwork delays. He never announced those decisions publicly. Charlotte only discovered them because grateful families thanked the foundation staff during community visits. One rainy afternoon, while reviewing design samples inside the foundation office, Charlotte accidentally spilled coffee across several presentation boards she had spent hours preparing. She immediately apologized, expecting frustration after ruining days of work. Lucas looked at the soaked pages, then calmly handed her a clean stack of paper towels. "Designs can be recreated," he said with an easy smile. "People should never believe a mistake defines their value." Charlotte stared at him for a moment before quietly laughing in relief. Together they spread the damaged pages across a conference table and began rebuilding the presentation from the original digital files. As the evening sunlight slowly returned after the rain, Charlotte realized something she had never expected to admit. She no longer looked forward to each project because of the opportunity alone. She looked forward to discovering what quiet act of kindness Lucas would perform next, always without seeking recognition, always believing that the most meaningful influence was measured not by how many people knew your name, but by how many lives became brighter after you quietly walked through them. Nearly 4 months passed, and the temporary assignment that had once seemed like a simple professional opportunity gradually became one of the most meaningful chapters of Charlotte Bennett's life. Together with the Ashford Foundation team, she redesigned educational campaigns, restored community centers, and created welcoming spaces that encouraged families to feel they truly belonged. Every completed project reminded her why she had chosen design in the first place. It had never been about logos or brochures alone. It had always been about helping people feel seen. Yet beneath the satisfaction of meaningful work, another realization quietly took shape. Every morning she found herself looking forward to seeing Lucas, not because of his position or influence, but because time spent beside him felt unexpectedly peaceful. That truth both comforted and unsettled her. She knew the assignment would eventually end. Their lives had begun in different worlds, and perhaps they were always meant to return there. One crisp autumn afternoon, Charlotte received an email confirming that another design agency had offered her a permanent creative director position in Seattle. The opportunity was extraordinary. Better compensation, national recognition, and complete creative freedom. Anyone would have considered it the logical next step. She read the message several times before quietly closing her laptop. Across the office, Lucas noticed the thoughtful expression that had replaced her usual smile. He did not ask immediately. Instead, he waited until the day's meetings had concluded before gently knocking on the open door of the design studio. "May I come in?" Charlotte looked up and smiled. "Of course." Lucas stepped inside, noticing several sketches spread across her desk alongside the unopened employment contract. "You have been unusually quiet today," he observed. Charlotte hesitated before handing him the letter. "I received an offer." Lucas read only enough to understand what it represented before carefully placing it back on the desk. "Congratulations," he said sincerely. "You have earned an opportunity like this." Charlotte appreciated the warmth in his voice, yet somehow his answer made the decision even more difficult. "You are not going to ask me to stay?" Lucas looked out the nearby window where volunteers were planting new trees along the foundation courtyard. "No." Charlotte appeared surprised. Lucas continued calmly. "I promised from the beginning that I would never ask you to choose anything except what you believed was right for your own future." Silence settled gently between them. Charlotte studied him for a long moment. There was no disappointment hidden behind his composure, only genuine respect for whatever decision she might make. That quiet restraint affected her more deeply than persuasion ever could. Later that evening, after everyone else had left, Charlotte walked through the foundation building one final time before heading home. She passed the children's art gallery where hundreds of colorful paintings covered the walls. She paused beside the community library whose welcoming identity she had designed. She watched volunteers preparing donated books for weekend reading programs. Everywhere she looked, she found reminders that meaningful work was measured by lives touched rather than titles earned. As she reached the lobby, She noticed Lucas outside, helping an elderly volunteer carry several boxes to her car despite the cold evening breeze. He laughed warmly as she thanked him, refusing every attempt to let someone else take over. Charlotte stood quietly inside the glass entrance without announcing her presence. In that ordinary moment, free from meetings, cameras, or expectations, she understood something that no newspaper article had ever revealed. The strongest part of Lucas Ashford had never been his influence. It was his unwavering ability to choose kindness when no one expected it and when almost no one was watching. Holding the Seattle offer in one hand and looking at the quiet scene unfolding beyond the glass, Charlotte realized that the decision before her was no longer about choosing between two careers. It had become a choice between returning to the life she had carefully planned and remaining in the place where, against every expectation, she had discovered the kind of home her heart had never known it was searching for. The following morning, Charlotte arrived at the foundation earlier than usual, carrying both the Seattle employment offer and a quiet certainty that had taken months to grow. Sunlight streamed through the tall glass windows, casting long golden reflections across the lobby where volunteers were already preparing for another community outreach event. Everything around her felt familiar now. The laughter of children visiting the reading center, the cheerful greetings exchanged between staff members, and the steady rhythm of people working together had become part of her daily life. She realized she no longer saw the foundation as another client. It had become a place where every project carried a human story, and every success belonged to an entire community rather than a single individual. Lucas was standing alone in the courtyard garden, reviewing plans for a new neighborhood education initiative when he noticed Charlotte approaching. He immediately closed the folder in his hands and offered the same calm smile that had greeted her on the rooftop months earlier. "Good morning," he said warmly. "Have you made your decision?" Charlotte looked at the envelope resting in her hands before slowly nodding. Yes. Lucas waited patiently, giving her all the time she needed. There was no pressure in his expression, only quiet respect. Charlotte took a slow breath before holding out the unopened Seattle contract. "I declined the offer this morning." Lucas looked at the envelope but made no attempt to take it. "May I ask why?" Charlotte smiled softly as she looked around the foundation grounds where volunteers were planting flowers beside a new children's garden. "Because I realized I was choosing between a better position and a better purpose." Lucas remained silent, allowing her to continue. "When I first met you, I thought you were simply a stranger who helped me escape an awkward moment. Later I discovered your name, your influence, and everything people said about you. But none of those things changed what mattered most." She looked directly into his eyes. "What changed everything was discovering the person you chose to be when no one expected anything from you." For the first time since they had met, Lucas seemed briefly unable to find the right words. He had negotiated billion-dollar agreements without hesitation, yet this quiet honesty left him speechless. After a long moment, he smiled with unmistakable gratitude. "You once told me that good design makes people feel welcome before they read a single word," he said gently. "You have done something very similar in my life." Charlotte laughed quietly. "How?" Lucas glanced toward the community center filled with volunteers preparing for another busy day. "For many years, people respected what I had built. Very few reminded me why I wanted to build it in the first place. You did." He reached into his briefcase and removed a slim folder bearing the foundation seal. "The board approved this unanimously yesterday." Charlotte accepted it with curious surprise. Inside was a formal proposal inviting her to become the creative director for community engagement, a permanent leadership role dedicated to expanding educational programs, supporting neighborhood organizations, and ensuring every foundation project reflected the welcoming spirit she had helped create. She looked up, visibly moved. "This is far more than I expected." Lucas smiled. "It is exactly what you earned." Charlotte accepted the offer with grateful tears shining in her eyes, and together they walked toward the community center where children were already gathering for the day's activities. As they entered, one little girl recognized Charlotte from a recent art workshop and ran forward holding a colorful drawing. The picture showed two strangers standing beneath a city skyline, smiling beneath bright autumn leaves. Across the top, written in careful handwriting, were the words, "Kindness helps people find each other." Charlotte and Lucas exchanged a quiet glance before smiling together. Months earlier, one brief, impulsive moment had brought two strangers together through pure chance. Yet neither of them believed chance had written the ending. It had been written instead by patience, respect, trust, and the quiet choice to see the good in another person before believing the stories the world was eager to tell. And long after the memory of one unexpected kiss had faded into the past, what remained was something far more enduring than romance alone. It was the discovery that the strongest relationships are not built by extraordinary moments, but by ordinary acts of kindness repeated every single day until they quietly become the foundation of a life shared together.